It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, a damning review reveals a collective failure to address questions about the ethnicity of grooming gangs. Baroness Casey's report has found flawed data was used to dismiss claims about gangs' nationalities. And the Home Secretary said officials have dodged the issue for fear of being called racist.
We cannot and must not shy away from these findings because, as Baroness Casey says, ignoring the issues, not examining and exposing them to the light, allows the criminality and depravity of a minority of men to be used to marginalise whole communities.
Tonight, as the government confirms a national inquiry will now take place, we'll be discussing the findings and recommendations of this report and ask what happens next. Also ahead tonight, we'll get the latest on the conflict between Israel and Iran, which is dominating the G7 summit. We'll hear from the Prime Minister, who is in Canada. Plus, calls for sex education to be expanded as those aged 16 to 19 are revealed to be the most likely age group to experience domestic abuse. And MI6 gets its first female boss. A glass ceiling is shattered, with the Foreign Intelligence Service to be led by a woman for the first time in its 116-year history. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight. Hello, good evening. Now, the report that persuaded the Prime Minister to launch a new national inquiry into grooming gangs has highlighted a collective failure to address questions about the ethnicity of perpetrators. Announcing the findings in the House of Commons, the Home Secretary said officials have dodged the issue for fear of being called racist or raising community tensions. The report's author, Baroness Casey, called on politicians to use this review as a chance for a national reset, saying the only thing that really matters is the protection of children. Well, among Baroness Casey's recommendations, the compulsory collection of ethnicity and nationality data for all suspects in child sexual abuse and criminal exploitation cases. The Baroness says every police force in England and Wales should review its records to identify cases of child sexual exploitation that haven't been acted on. She's called for a national police operation and a national inquiry, coordinating a series of targeted investigations into child sexual exploitation. And Baroness Casey says the Department for Transport should take immediate action to put a stop to out-of-area taxis and bring in more rigorous licensing standards. Our Home Editor, Jason Farrell, has our first report tonight.
We've spoken to victims of grooming gangs across the country, and in 2022 a case was reopened in Humberside following a Sky News investigation, where we found threatening Snapchats and texts, diary entries, school reports from concerned teachers and photos of injuries that all indicated teenage victims had been abused. One of them we'll call Anna. She welcomes the government's decision to launch a national inquiry.
The attitudes of the professionals, the police, social services, from what I've heard or seen, they seem very similar in every area. Police attitudes towards victims, it's not investigated properly, and then I think it ends up being a bit too late. Like our case, it's, I don't know, maybe 8 years down the line, and now they're asking witnesses for information.
Anna's experiences are all too familiar, according to today's report by Louise Casey, who found adolescent girls too often treated as adults, not children, and that police are still not properly investigating or capturing data on the offenders.
This report found that ethnicity is not recorded by the police for 2/3 of perpetrators, even though a similar report 5 years ago found exactly the same thing. Baroness Casey says instead, flawed data is repeatedly used to dismiss claims about Asian grooming gangs. And she says this only plays into the hands of those who wish to sow division in society.
The Home Secretary has accepted recommendations for compulsory collection of ethnicity data and for a national overview to look at reopening historic cases.
And on the key issues of ethnicity that I'd asked her to examine, she has found continued failure to gather proper, robust national data, despite concerns being raised going back very many years. In the local data that the audit examined from 3 police forces, They identify clear evidence of overrepresentation among suspects of Asian and Pakistani heritage men. And she refers to examples of organisations avoiding the topic altogether for fear of appearing racist or raising community tensions.
All leading to the government launching a national inquiry, which earlier this year they had described as unnecessary, a clear U-turn.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's handling of this scandal is an extraordinary failure of leadership. His judgment has once again been found wanting. Since he became Prime Minister, he and the Home Secretary dismissed calls for an inquiry because they did not want to cause a stir. They accused those of us demanding justice for the victims of this scandal as, and I quote, jumping on a far-right bandwagon. Yes.
The Prime Minister on a trip to Canada, forced to defend his reasoning.
As a safeguard, I asked Louise Casey to look again, do an audit, to see if there's anything that had been missed. She's carried out that audit, she's presented that to me, I've read it in full, and on the basis of what she's found, she says there should be a national inquiry. I've looked at her report, I've considered that material, I think she's right, and that's why there'll be a national inquiry.
Anna will welcome new laws to protect children from being blamed for the crimes committed against them. Obtaining her police records using a subject access request, she found officers appeared to blame her for lifestyle choices and putting herself at risk.
Every time I look at it, I still think it's shocking. It was the same sort of terminology: lifestyle choices, liar, attention seeker, and the majority of it was negative, like bad attitude. It was really rare that I'd come across something where they were actually listening or they were concerned.
Baroness Casey's report contains a whole chapter titled Denial. She says it's time for honesty and a focus on protecting children. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, the Prime Minister has endured months of criticism for refusing to call a national inquiry into grooming gangs. Now, Sir Keir Starmer says his view has been changed by Baroness Casey, who also believed originally that a new inquiry was not necessary. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has been taking a look at this report in more detail and examining its political significance.
Grooming gangs and a national inquiry Keir Starmer did not want. This damning 200-page audit explains why government troubleshooter Sarah Louise Casey thinks it's vital. This issue, she thinks, has gone on for so long. The report's timeline starts 16 years ago, and it goes through year after year of missed clues. In 2010, Asian men in Derbyshire and separately Pakistani men in Rotherham were convicted of targeting younger women. And ever since then, this has been a pattern explored in newspaper reports, in documentaries, in dramas, in multiple inquiries at local and national level. But the conclusion of this report is we are still in denial, still not tackling it properly, still going on with, last year, and in 2023, 700 recorded offences of group-based child sexual exploitation in that year, 2023. And this is likely to be even an underestimate. It's highly unlikely that this accurately reflects the true scale of the problem. And it seems it's getting worse. The report pointed out that child sexual abuse and exploitation is falling in children's services despite a rise in police reports of child sexual abuse. This, despite a decade of promises from the politicians that have been dealing with it.
We have taken action.
We can never allow that to happen again.
Today's announcements represent the most robust response of any government to tackle this awful crime.
Now, this is quite something in the report. It says ethnicity is shied away from despite being a question for many years and is still not recorded for 2/3 of perpetrators. And while the data isn't comprehensive, nevertheless, the report concludes that in 3 councils, there has disproportionately been a group of child sexual exploitation offending by men of Asian ethnicity. Now, the next point for me is the biggest one, on so-called expert panels that are held when things have gone wrong, and they don't deal with the hardest points. Look at this section. More often than not, The official reports do not discuss the perpetrators, let alone their ethnicity or any cultural drivers. There is a palpable discomfort in any discussion of ethnicity in most of them. That's incredible. There's a whole chapter of this report just called denial. So Louise Casey has demanded an independent commission with full statutory powers available to them, able to compel witnesses where they refuse to cooperate. And it continues, each investigation will call witnesses to give evidence and will require records to be submitted. It's taken months of pressure to get this far. Listen to Keir Starmer being challenged in January by Kemi Badenoch.
Why won't he have a national inquiry?
Mr. Speaker, we've had a national inquiry.
Is this truly the end of the decades of failure for victims?
Sam, thank you. Sam Coates with a closer look there at Baroness Casey's report that was released today. Well, let's talk more about it, shall we? Tonight I am joined by a sexual grooming survivor, Tony Louise. Tony Louise says she was groomed and sold for sex by a man that she thought was her boyfriend when she was just 12 years old. Also with us tonight, Jane Senior. Jane ran a Rotherham Young People's Outreach project between 1999 and 2011. We're also joined by Blackpool councillor Paul Galley and Richard Scorer, a lawyer specialising in abuse law. Thank you all for joining us on the UK tonight to discuss this issue. Tony Louise, I'm going to come to you first. It's good to see you. We spoke at the start of the year, didn't we? In fact, back in January, when the Prime Minister said a national inquiry was not needed. Yeah. You disagreed with that strongly as a survivor of grooming. What's your reaction to this today?
I'm glad that there's been an inquiry. Obviously, it's good that the ball is now rolling. But what is going to happen, like, moving forward? Like, no one's speaking about, like, things that are going to be put in place to prevent these things from happening again.
It's worth reminding people why you felt so strongly about a national inquiry, because the situation we were in when we last spoke is that the government recommended a series of local inquiries in towns and cities where grooming had been identified.
Yeah. It all just comes back to what's going to happen. Like, I don't really, as a survivor, this is going to come across really horrible. I don't really care about inquiries and things like that. It's about preventing this from ever happening again.
Yeah.
So that there isn't another 12-year-old Tony Louise out there that's now sitting at 25 years old and still can't get past all of the trauma that's happened to her throughout our early teen life.
Yeah. For you, it's as much about prevention as it is about any form of justice. Jane, I'm going to come to you first. As I said, you ran an outreach project in Rotherham between 1999 and 2011, and I had to double-check this figure when it came through to me today. You reported around 1,700 cases of child sexual exploitation to police and local senior workers. I mean, that is a staggering figure to come from one youth worker. Talk to me about what it was like on the front line of this problem.
We were reporting this going back to 1999. We were sharing intelligence. We were speaking to children. We were speaking to parents. We were reporting this to senior people in the police, in the council. It was very difficult for me and my team to kind of listen to what these children were going through, which were harrowing, torture, trafficking. And like to sit here today in 2025 and listen again to another victim survivor that has to fight to be believed, fight for justice, fight for therapy, fight for a national inquiry and fight for compensation. And I just think, you know, we need to get off this roundabout now and we need to give these girls the respect that they need, and that's answers and actions.
Jane, I fear that I know the answer to this, but of the 1,700 cases you reported to the authorities, how many resulted in any kind of justice for those children?
We had one case where 4 girls got justice.
And what kind of response were you getting from the police and local authorities when you reported them? And did you approach the subject of ethnicity with local authorities and the police?
Yeah. So it was a lot of victim blaming. Victims were complicit. They were in relationships. They wouldn't make good witnesses. I don't know what a good witness actually looks like. They were returning to their abusers. They were lying. And as for us, we were rocking the multicultural boat. I remember being told very clearly by a very high person in South Yorkshire Police that I was going against the Human Rights Act, not the human rights of the children, but the human rights of the perpetrator, by reporting that they were abusing our children without having evidence that that was happening. And then again, as we jump forward in about 2018-19, I was informed following an IOPC investigation into the police that a number of our intelligence reports, I don't know how many because we submitted 1,000, ethnicity had been removed before they went onto the police system.
At this point, I'll bring in our councillor from Blackpool, Paul Galley. Councillor, you've actually conducted your own report into child grooming in Blackpool. Can you tell me about the situation in Blackpool? Because, you know, you're saying that once we take the lid off this problem, it's not just places like Rotherham and Rochdale, it's also about coastal towns and cities as well. What's going on in Blackpool?
Yeah, absolutely. When I looked at the Casey spec, because my background is audit, it very much looked and it talked about that we have to focus on towns like Rochdale, Oldham, rightly because of what's gone on, and Oxfordshire. So it always meant they were always going to find a particular type of perpetrator with a particular type of structure of grooming, but that didn't feel like what was going on here in Blackpool. There's been some very well documented cases. The problem with tourist towns and coastal towns is, if anyone's ever seen Jaws, you've got the mayor who wants to keep the beaches open. It's very much a case of nobody wants to talk about it because it affects the tourist economy. I wanted to talk about it because being in audit, I could smell something wasn't right. It didn't feel right. So I started to look at it purely from the numbers to keep the facts together. And I came across some very scary things in terms of just over the last 3 years, for example, there were 1,746 reported sexual assaults on children in Blackpool that nobody wanted to talk about. I had to go and dig through freedom of information requests. Then I looked at how many registered sexual offenders that live in towns like this. Then I multiplied that data with all the why that is. So for example, poor housing, transients, cash economy, amusement arcades. And then I realised that this wasn't just Blackpool, this is going to be all of the coastal towns in the United Kingdom will have similar things going on. And my worry is with the report and the national inquiry that we're now talking about, we're not going to pick up on that. We're going to focus on a particular group of people, a particular type of abuse. For example, in coastal towns, it will also involve boys as well. And I feel that in these national inquiries that are coming, that it must include coastal towns. Otherwise, just hearing Tony there say that it's about never happening again, I fear in 5 years' time we will be saying we need to have one in coastal towns. So it's so important that we include all of these unique things because there are different type of perpetrators out there.
You make a number of really good points there, a couple I want to pick up on. You know, it's so easy to talk about grooming gangs in the past tense. You know, Tony Louise says she doesn't want this to happen again. And I know when I've spoken to Tony Louise before, she's certain that this is still happening. That's the sad reality. This is happening across the UK still. The Home Secretary in the House of Commons today said, you know, she wants old cases reopened where police haven't investigated it properly. She says about 800 cases have been reopened. She thinks it could be more than 1,000. And you talk about data. You've been collecting data, and data is key. Today, we learned that it's going to become mandatory. It'll be a formal requirement for any of these reports of crimes to ask for ethnicity and nationality. It has to be recorded. It will enable new research. This information has to be shared, because that's been another criticism. Information hasn't been shared across police forces and local authorities, and there's been no cooperation. How vital is this, Paul, to any success?
Absolutely. One of the things that I found, for example, was where all councils will tell you what they're doing currently. It was, well, we're doing this and it's great and it's really working. When you start to ask for evidence, well, how many prosecutions have come about as a result of that work? Then they send you on the merry-go-round of, oh, we don't hold that data. You need to go and talk to them. You need to go and talk to the police. Now you need to go and talk to the CPS. No one holds this data. So it's not just about the data. I think it's about the transparency. It's about our ability to be open about that, because we need to evidence in the future that actually when we are saying we now have these things in place, we need to be able to be transparent about how are we actually managing the effectiveness of them. At the moment, nobody really wants to do that, because they may have all sorts of very good reasons why, because they're not responsible for it, because these are now multi-party agencies, and they're all relying on the other to hold it. So I think it is very much about transparency, but it's crucial that as we move forwards that we hold these organisations to account on an ongoing basis and say, where's the evidence? We need to, that's what politicians need to do.
Well, talking about evidence, Baroness Casey came out today and said, I can't legally prove what the survivors she's spoken to, I can't legally prove what they are saying, but I believe them. Let's get into the legals of this. Richard Scorer from the law firm Slater and Gordon. This national inquiry will have statutory powers. It will compel witnesses to come forward. Of course, it has no power of prosecution or anything like that. So what kind of, it's worth explaining what kind of teeth this inquiry will have for the children, many of them now young women that it's representing.
Well, you make an important point, which is that an inquiry is not the same as a criminal court. It can't prosecute people. It can't put them in jail. That's something for the criminal legal process, and we can come to that in a moment because there are issues with that. But in terms of the inquiry, what it can look at, obviously, is institutional failure. It can look at where there's been a failure to act on knowledge or suspicion of cases, amongst local authorities, amongst police and so forth. It can look at all of that, and it can potentially name and shame those who have failed. And then, of course, it can make recommendations for future improvement. So that's what an inquiry can do. But you're absolutely right to say that is different from the criminal law process.
I just want to pick up on something else that Baroness Casey said, and I'm going to put this to you, Jane Senior. She said, if we don't ask difficult questions, bad people will. She was referring there to those who do hold racist views, seizing this grooming gangs issue as an opportunity to sow division, a minority of men who have been tarnishing whole communities. And again, I'll talk to Tony Louise about this because she's been very open about the fact that we need to have difficult conversations about abuse, about paedophiles. It's uncomfortable to talk about, but we have to talk about it in order to deal with it. When it comes to the issue about race, can you just give me an idea of the pushback that you faced? Were you labelled racist when you dared to talk about the ethnicity of some of the men you were reporting?
Me?
Yes, sorry, I was talking to you, Jane. Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Oh, right, sorry, to talk to me, just...
Jane, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Always push back, kind of had some very difficult conversations, still have those difficult conversations. But on the flip side of that, I have spoken to people that are part of that community that are absolutely horrified with what's going on. And they're saying that there's not enough conversations and it's not being spoke about enough as well.
I just want to bring in this response we've had from Rotherham Council today, an updated response given the report that's come out today. It says there were clear failings at that time in Rotherham in relation to child sexual exploitation, as fully covered in the reports by Alexis J and Louise Casey. Since then, Rotherham Council's children's services have been transformed, and as Baroness Casey reports, Rotherham today is a completely different council. We will never again be complacent, and we will continue to pursue the highest standards of protection and support for our children and young people. Tony Louise, I want to bring you in on that point, because obviously Rotherham has been the focus of public attention when it comes to child grooming gangs. But as we've reflected in this conversation and when we've spoken previously, this happens nationwide. What are your fears about what's going on right now? We know a national inquiry can take up to 5 years. It's very costly. You know, we've had the last 15 years where there have been local inquiries and national inquiry recommendations in place. Nothing has changed. What are your fears about what's going on while all this procedure takes place?
My fear, well, one of my fears are the fact that Scotland's been forgotten about in all of this. We heard that she said England and Wales.
Yeah.
But it's happening in Scotland and Ireland too. And no one seems to want to speak about that. No one wants to speak about the fact that Scotland's still part of the UK as well. So if it's a national inquiry, then it should be national. It should be Scotland, England, Wales, Ireland. It shouldn't just be 2 countries that are getting an inquiry.
Police Scotland have given us a statement today. We are committed to tackling all forms of violence against women and girls. We will listen and we will investigate all reports, taking a victim-centred approach. On that note, Tony Louise, when we last spoke in January, I asked you about your case that was still with Police Scotland, about your experience of being groomed by an older man. What is the update on that?
There is no update.
Still?
There is no update. There has been no update since...
So when you hear... So that's what I mean. When you hear about these being taken seriously, you've had no update in your report, let alone an outcome.
Taken seriously at all. Again, my case is slightly different. The police were involved in my abuse and my grooming. So I don't know if that's maybe got something to do with why I've not heard anything.
Yeah.
Again, speculation, but no.
Yeah, we talk about the perpetrators and we talk about local councils not taking action, but we know that, you know, the police are being looked at as well in terms of whatever role they may have played or what they may or may not have done. Richard, I'll just bring you back in because, you know, let's talk about the implementation of recommendations from inquiries, because as Tony Louise reflected there, for the survivors of this, the children, now so many of them young women, these recommendations have been around for over a decade now, some of them, and nothing has been done. Why have we got a problem in this country with implementation after national inquiries?
Well, we have a massive problem in this country with that. It's a kind of British disease of having lots of inquiries and never implementing the recommendations. And I was involved for 7 years in the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, ICSA. That reported in 2022. There were 20 key recommendations from that. Not a single one has been implemented 2.5 years on. Some of them the government has actually rejected. Some are not moving forward. Others the government has promised to implement in a watered down form, but none of them have actually been implemented yet. And it's a disgraceful situation. And I completely understand the frustration of survivors actually who say, well, if we're going to have another inquiry, what's the point? Because we're going to have another load of recommendations that sit on the shelf and we can't, have that cycle continuing over and over again. If we're going to spend money on an inquiry, and I think it's right and justified that we do, then we've got to have some assurance that recommendations will be implemented.
Yeah, for survivors, it's about prevention and protection of survivors, protection of children. But for the public, a lot of it is about accountability. So many people will be watching the TV tonight going, authorities knew about this for years. There's been dramas made about it. There have been investigative reports on the TV, in the newspapers. It's all over social media. Everybody knows there is a problem. And for them, it's about accountability. How easy is it to hold public bodies who heard, well, in Jane's case, she reported over 1,700 cases of child exploitation in one area and nothing was done about it. You know, authorities looked the other way. How easy is it to hold them to account? Can we?
Well, if you're talking about the inquiry process, then it can be possible to hold people to account through that, providing the inquiry has statutory powers and the government has confirmed.
But it can be a springboard for criminal prosecutions, can't it? How rare are those?
Well, I mean, that is a big problem in this area, and part of the issue is the length of time that criminal investigations are taking. And you know, I'm working with young women who are waiting 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 years for criminal investigations to go forward, and you know, for cases to get to trial. And of course, the large majority of cases don't get to trial. So, you know, one of the things we have to understand going forward is what resource is going into the system.
Well, I was going to say that the Home Secretary said it could be up to 1,000 new cases, historical cases, never mind new ones. Can the system cope?
Well, at the moment it can't, and there's been talk about the National Crime Agency coming in, which I think is a good thing. There needs to be more coordination across the country between police forces around that, particularly when you're looking at cases involving trafficking. But the fact is that unless you have more resource in the system, then the system is not going to be able to deliver the outcomes that we really need to see in these cases. So that, you know, that this is the kind of detail that we actually need to hear from the government after the announcement today.
OK, Richard Scorer from the law firm Slater and Gordon, James Senior, Rotherham youth worker, Councillor Paul Galley of Blackpool, and Tony Louise. Thank you so much for joining us on the UK Tonight to discuss Baroness Casey's report. Appreciate your time. Still to come on the programme. As G7 leaders meet in Canada, the Prime Minister calls for de-escalation in the Middle East. We'll have the latest. And why campaigners are calling on the government to make sex education compulsory up to the age of 18.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Let's get to the Middle East now, where Israel and Iran have exchanged more missile strikes for a fourth day in a row. Overnight, Israel's air defences were breached with at least 8 people killed. It comes as the Israeli president defended his country's decision to launch a war, saying Israel had no choice but to attack Iran. Meanwhile, world leaders are meeting in Canada right now for the G7 summit, with the conflict expected to dominate discussions there. Speaking earlier, Sir Keir Starmer said he believed there was a consensus on the need for de-escalation in the region.
Well, it is really important that we focus on de-escalation because the risks of the conflict escalating are obvious across the region and beyond the region. the impact that this could and probably will have on Gaza, which is a tinderbox, and of course the impact on the economy. That is why at the G7 there's such a focus on de-escalation. That'll be an intense discussion for our talks today, but we have to find a way to de-escalate this situation, notwithstanding the concerns that we all have about the nuclear programme. There's no doubt about that. Notwithstanding, we all accept Israel's right to self-defence, of course, but there must be de-escalation, and that will be the central focus of much of the discussion today.
And at 9 o'clock tonight, The World with Yalda Hakim will be live from Jerusalem. Yalda has been speaking to the Israeli President Isaac Herzog. You can see that interview in full at 9. Campaigners have delivered a petition to Downing Street today, calling on the government to make relationships and sex education compulsory up to the age of 18. This comes after new data revealed that 16 to 19-year-olds experience the highest rate of domestic abuse of any age group. Sky's Ashna Hiranak has this report.
Domestic abuse, so unseen and unchallenged, it's been allowed to thrive in an unexpected age group. 16 to 19-year-olds are now the most likely victims and survivors. Faustine was in an abusive relationship throughout those teenage years.
Because I was a child, it's very difficult sometimes. The lines are a bit blurred between love and abuse, and sometimes abusers masquerade abuse as love. So when my partner at the time was kind of like always demanding where I was, at first I thought it was caring, but that quickly escalated and became coercive control.
She didn't recognise the abuse because she didn't know how to spot it. Lessons on relationships and sex education are compulsory up to the age of 16, but Faustine thinks they shouldn't stop there and instead continue to 18.
Do you think there's a whole generation of people who are being let down at the moment?
I do very much. I think there's so much at risk. I think when I say that it's a life-saving education, I'm not just saying that as a big kind of catchy statement, it's because I genuinely believe it. I think that if all young people, regardless of their gender, are well equipped to know the signs of abuse, what a healthy relationship looks like, I think people will be kept safer from the kind of abuse that I faced.
Some are already acting on the warning signs. We've been invited to this college in Brighton that took a stand on healthy relationship education after the COVID lockdown. Born out of demand from their almost 4,000 student body and funded internally with no extra support, they believe it's worth it.
We are dealing with students during their formative years. They're transitioning from children into legally adults. And this is a pivotal time when adult behaviours need to be discussed and addressed and taught to young people so that they go out into the world with expectations, boundaries, tools and knowledge of what to do.
Gaps in knowledge that's contributing to a wider scandal.
The UK is in the grip of an epidemic of violence against women and girls. And over the past 3 years, it's teenagers who have reported the most cases of domestic abuse. This campaign to change and influence what's taught in classrooms like this, yes, could create healthier relationships, but could also save lives.
This is why Faustine is on a mission to mandate. Her petition, with over 100,000 signatures, has been handed to Downing Street. A spokesperson from the government told us they're reviewing the relationship, sex and health curriculum and are committed to addressing the issue of domestic abuse, looking at everything from supporting victims to changing the law. Education alone won't prevent domestic abuse, but it could be vital for some of the most vulnerable. Ashna Hiranak, Sky News.
Still to come on the UK tonight, we'll be speaking to a spy novelist as MI6 announced their first ever female chief. And we'll hear about the shocking cost of rural crime in Wales. MI6 is going to be led by a woman for the first time in its 116-year history. Blaise Metrovelli, who joined the Secret Intelligence Service in 1999, will become the 18th chief of the organisation and will take over from Sir Richard Moore when he steps down this autumn. Well, we're joined now by spy novelist Ava Glass to discuss what might be my favourite story of the day today. Because, Ava, this is significant on so many levels. Let's put it into historical context first, shall we?
Well, yes. I mean, she's the first head of MI6 in its entire history, going back to 1909. So she's a groundbreaker in that way. And also, her appointment tells us so much, well, a little at least. It gives us a glimpse at what's going on at MI6 because she formerly served as Q, the head of technology.
And she now becomes C, right?
Exactly. So now she is elevated up to C in the alphabet soup of intelligence agencies.
So that's the glass ceiling shattered at MI6. Let's talk about her credentials for the top job. She's been described as a career spy. I mean, what a CV. Not that we can see a lot of it, probably, or can we?
Well, we can see more than we can with many spies, in part because she gave an interview 3 years ago with the Financial Times, only not under her real name. So now we know in that article she was listed as Ada, she was Q, and she talked about always having wanted to be a spy ever since she was a child. So we know she is one of those women, I met quite a few of them when I worked with spies, who this is all they ever wanted to do.
And what is the career path of a spy? Because there's something about, talking about it when you're at school. We all read spy novels, we all go through that phase, but making it a reality, what is the pathway? I can't imagine a careers guidance counsellor at school being able to plot out that route for you.
Yes, indeed. I would say getting in is the hardest part. I knew quite a few people who wanted to be spies and had tried to get in. They don't make it easy. They want you to work for it. The days of the tap on the shoulder are long gone. Now you have to find your route. And usually for MI6, it starts in the Foreign Office. And for MI5, it often starts at the Home Office. But you just get your foot in the door and then you start banging on the door on the other side of that door. That's generally how they do it. And my understanding of Blaise Metrovelli is that she went in through the Foreign Office.
Well, she's got such a great name for a career spy, now head of MI6. We know a little bit about her route in. It's worth reiterating the difference between MI5 and MI6, because MI6 is always seen as the more secretive organisation.
Yes, it has a little glamour because James Bond was MI6, not MI5. But MI6 is the external spy agency. So it's the one that spies outside of the UK. Whereas MI5 is the internal spy agency. It spies on us, basically. So, yeah, she's on the external spy. So she'll be dealing, as see, with Israel and Iran, with Russia, Ukraine, and with China all the time. So she's going to have to hit the ground running.
Yeah, you mentioned certain nations there. What a time to take on this role.
Oh, my goodness. I think it's not a poison chalice. She's ready for this, I'm sure, given her history. But goodness me, it's not a job I envy. These are very interesting times. And it may be worth noting that they've chosen a technology expert as their new C. There may be a reason for that. So I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, languages, a background in tech. She does seem like a very modern head of MI6. And it's worth talking about, the man she succeeded, because he championed her, well, not necessarily her, but a woman being the next head of MI6.
Yes, I mean, for more than 3 years, MI6 has been laying the groundwork for this. And I'm fascinated by that, as if they knew back then this was coming, and they've allowed access to there were women director generals. There were 4 director generals within MI6, and 3 of them were women 3 years ago, and they told us that. So they wanted us to know that women were rising through the ranks, that their sort of fusty image was changing. They were getting us ready. So now we get to see what happens next.
We know a little about her. We don't know much about her, of course, because of the nature of her job. But one of the anecdotes I like about her, because, you have to balance being a woman with a mother in the workplace, and we talk about that a lot. And, you know, there's an anecdote of her talking about the fact that when she got her armoured car, she had to ask if there was ISOFIX in it for her baby seat. For those who don't know what they are, they're the little contraptions that get the baby seat into the car. So I just like the fact that that's acknowledged in one of the biggest roles in this country, perhaps one of the most important ones. Ava Glass, it's been really interesting to talk to you. Thank you so much. Ava Glass, they're reflecting on the fact that MI6 will have its first ever female chief, and it's been around for 116 years. Good to talk to you. Thank you. Now, the cost of rural crime in Wales is at its highest in more than a decade. A report from the National Farmers Union says Welsh farmers lost almost £3 million last year, with gangs targeting livestock as well as quad bikes and expensive farm machinery. Sky's Dan Whitehead has this report.
This is the moment the farm's £10,000 quad bike was taken. 1 a.m, the thieves caught on a camera, normally used to monitor newborn calves.
As you can see here, we've got the calving camera on that back of the sheds.
It was the start of a spate of rural crime in West Wales last summer.
Since then, nearly 50 bikes have actually gone from the Pembrokeshire, Carmarthenshire, Ceredigion area. So that was, every other day on Facebook you were seeing somebody posting that they'd lost a bike in the early hours of that morning. So, yeah, it was just completely mad to see how many were going in this short space of time.
New figures out today show rural crime in the UK cost an estimated £44.1 million last year. That's actually a fall of around 16% compared to 2023. Wales is the only UK nation that's seen a rise, with rural crime up 18% in 2024 to £2.8 million. It's not just agricultural machinery that's being taken.
They spend most of the time on the common. There's 5,000 acres here.
In Pontypool, sheep farmer James says he's had around 200 of his flock taken over the last 4 years, costing him around £20,000.
The problem is our flock's been going since 1936, so it's a closed flock. I don't buy stock in, it's purely our own breeding. So when I lose stock, I'm not just losing the money side of it, I'm losing the breeding as well.
Police say they are increasing resources to tackle rural crime this year and issuing DNA kits to mark valuable equipment. Most police forces in England and Wales do have a dedicated rural crime team, but policing large, sparsely populated areas like this, often with little or no CCTV, can make bringing convictions difficult. It's understood criminal gangs are now using drones to recce target areas.
NFU Mutual works closely with the National Rural Crime Unit, and what we found increasingly is that organised criminals are targeting certain areas of the countryside. So they're hitting multiple farms in one night, they're raiding them, they're moving away to another area and then hitting multiple farms there. So it is hugely concerning.
For James and other farmers, they are becoming repeat victims of rural crime. Another challenge for an industry already struggling to stay in business. Dan Whitehead, Sky News.
Coming up on the UK tonight, why 5-time Champions League winner Gareth Bale could be pitching up in Plymouth.
So direct hit on the hospital. Absolute mayhem.
All the bays are full and they're all gunshot wounds. Absolute carnage here.
We hear a lot about the dead in this conflict, but there are going to be so many disabled people.
We could make a difference here and stop the war, and if we don't, I don't think there will be anything to come back to.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force. It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
What country are you
From the UK.
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting. Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. We are pushing forward, trying to get people to disperse.
What Prince Harry wanted to do was to eject me.
Is that your opinion?
It is. It is.
They were serious, coordinated attacks.
It's an entire generation that will have to contend with the horrifying impacts of this conflict.
The number of patients is increasing.
It's been quite some day.
Hey, what country are you
From the UK.
Why don't you go back to your country?
You've gone viral.
I've ever had such a reaction.
It's just incredible.
Since the Oval Office meeting, have they reached out to you?
If Ukraine asks for help and its allies decide to help, then that's the end of it.
Criticism of you, the president, is banned. How is this a fair election?
Historic day here today.
Beth Rigby from Sky.
You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more.
There could be some more painful decisions to come.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Welcome back. Before the break, I asked the question, why would Gareth Bale, five-time, was he a five-time
Champions League
winner?
Yes.
And, you know, Real Madrid star, Tottenham star, of course. Why would he be pitching up at Plymouth? And I actually don't know the answer to it. So I'm going to ask Dharmesh.
It's not to come back to playing.
Oh, right,
so
OK.
let's rule that out. It's not for a managerial role after, but he is actually fronting an American-based consortium over a possible takeover of Plymouth. It should be said here, it's a consortium that consists of a US private equity group. Bale is being used as the face of that consortium. We shouldn't get too ahead of ourselves just now. It's just initial talks at this moment in time. That hasn't gone any further than that at this stage. But what we do know is that the Plymouth chairman, Simon Hallett, for the best part of 2025, has been looking for fresh investment. He thought he'd got some in May, only for that to fall through. He's hoping now that this American-based consortium, fronted by the one and only Gareth Bale, might prove different.
Why are the Americans so interested in the EFL? They seem to get a famous face and then come searching for a club.
Yeah, well, I mean, Bale is not the only one to be involved with an EFL club, well, potentially. His former Tottenham and Real Madrid teammate, Luka Modric, you'll remember, is becoming an investor at Swansea and a co-owner. And, of course, the biggest one, NFL legend Tom Brady, a minority investor at Birmingham City. It'll be interesting to see if Bale does pitch up at Plymouth, an intriguing story involving Gareth Bale, as is the rest of tonight's sport.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
Welcome to number 9 Goodison Road, the Strikers Suite. It's 27 years now since I bought this place. I used to have a box at Goodison. Those days used to watch the game through the box, which isn't the right thing to do. So I bought this place, converted the top floor to a flat, and then just, as you see, converted this to a corporate suite. I took the 10 lads from the box over with me, so it's also 10, now we've got 26. It's just a gang of mates who get together. We all throw in the kitties to sort of get our food and our drink and stuff like that. All our memorabilia is based around strikers, but one of our more famous guests was Howard Kendall. Howard lived by me in Formby, and every home game we used to pick him up, bring him out here. You see his chair in the corner, that's the original chairman's chair from the club's first form, and that we call Howard's Corner. We've got a guest book, and there's all kinds of people came in. I thought they came to see me.
Sky Business sponsors this report.
Time for a quick look at the weather before we go.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Right, I keep hearing about a heat wave. Let's see what details we've got. There is some wet weather around tomorrow, but this will break up during the day. For the rest of this week, though, the weather will be largely settled and the temperatures, will start to soar. We could climb to 32 degrees by the end of this week. Back to this evening, looking wet and windy in the far northwest. Elsewhere, generally dry with some pleasant evening sunshine.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
That's all from the UK tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, so see you then. Up next, it's The World with Yalda Hakim live in Jerusalem.